Good afternoon. This program with Rosecrans began in 2014. Rosecrans is a drug addiction facility for a variety of ages, but I primarily work with an inpatient facility for adolescents, ages 14 to 21, and Monarch House, which is a halfway house for ages 18 to 24. Each 2-hour session begins with introductions and an explanation of the Japanese garden logo. Remembering people's names helps them feel seen. The logo, Ware Tada Toru Roshiro, roughly translates into I know only contentment, to know what is sufficient, or in this moment I am content. The history of the garden is important. For many of you, you already know that Anderson Japanese Gardens really began as Mr. Anderson's backyard project, and with the partnership of Huishi Kurisu and 40 plus years of expansion, it's now a 12 plus acre public garden. This history leads the adolescents to realize the importance of the passage of time and dreams, a seed planted. Topography always starts with a definition as lay of the land. I know it's simplified, but some of the adolescents really don't have any idea. This is really their first experience. If you've been to the Midwest, of course you know we're just flatlanders and prairie is our original landscape, and Japan is 4 mountainous islands. The 3 components of a Japanese garden are rocks, water, and plants. Rocks are really the foundation of the garden, but also recall such notions as strength, endurance, longevity. Water sustains living things. Humans can't exist without water. Plants indicate the changing of the seasons, and especially in the Midwest, spring is filled with lots of blooms, oranges, pinks, whites, summer a variety of shades of greens and blues, and of course, fall, my favorite season, vibrant colors of orange, reds, yellows. And in the winter, really the foundation of the garden is exposed, and the snow really accentuates our beautifully trained pines. After this foundation, we head into the garden of reflection. The response is always positive, awe-inspired. The bronze angels were sculpted by Carls Mills, a Swedish sculptor. They were installed in the garden in honor of Mr. Anderson's parents, who were from Sweden. Patterns and rhythms in nature are replicated in a Japanese garden to evoke that feeling that we have when we're out in natural spaces. One of the patterns is plants leaning over the water. So I really encourage the adolescents to notice details as they meander through the garden space. The Garden of Reflection is really a more contemporary Japanese garden. It's primarily used for large events. There's several lawn spaces, including the large lawn in front of the pavilion, and there are wider concrete paths to increase accessibility. We continue to move forward to the Gaboshi Bridge. It's our most formal of the 3 bridges that span Spring Creek. Spring Creek is a natural waterway and really divides the garden in half. We move from the Garden of Reflection, that event space, into the more formal Japanese garden, pond strolling garden, the tea house, and the West Waterfall. Before we walk through the main gate, we talk about transitions. Much like a home, a door or a gate signifies movement into a new space. Do we know what's on the other side? And how can we apply this to our own life? Take a deep breath and be open to the possibilities that lie on the other side. Next, we head to the tea garden, and as we enter, you can see the tea house across this small creek. We talk about the 4 principles of tea: harmony, wa, with nature and other people; respect, ke, to all things and people; purity, se, of a clean and orderly environment; tranquility, shaku, amid the chaotic world we live in. At the tea garden entrance is this beautifully carved stone that says Kore Yori Sando, which is mountain trail from here. We sit in the machiai, or waiting space, and are quiet. Moving through the mountain path, we continue to the tea house. As you can see, the tea implements are all laid out. Matcha is ground tea. Scoops are placed in a ceramic bowl. A little bit of hot water is added, and it's whisked with a bamboo whisk. Sweets are given first, and when that lovely flavor is still in your mouth, you are presented your bowl of tea. It's polite to slurp the last bit. Tokonoma, or alcove, displays things like paintings, pottery, flower arrangements, but always from the garden, really indicating this moment in time. You know, maybe it's spring and the peony is blooming, or maybe it's fall and that Japanese maple has turned the most beautiful red. Sometimes other forms of art. As you can see in our tea house, we have a scroll. It says Nichi Nichi Kore Kojitsu, which is every day is a good day. Our next destination is the gazebo. Here's a picture of the ceiling highlighting the Japanese construction. Posts are scribed onto rocks, which prevent rot and last for decades or even centuries. The ever-breathtaking waterfall is our final destination on the tour. While standing on the stone bridge directly in front of the waterfall, you can only see the lower falls. But when you meander to the back deck where this photo was taken, the whole waterfall is revealed. There are times in life when a different perspective is helpful. The next hour is physical. We work in the garden doing whatever presents itself depending on the season. Spring consists of weeding beds and paths, maybe some mulching. Summer has a bit more variety, helping with pruning debris, removing algae from water features, weeding paths, or dusting cobwebs from buildings. Sometimes fall can be a lot of raking, but not really this year. So when we left, most of the leaves were still on the trees. But the possibilities of work are endless, and the purpose is really to reconnect to that outside world, build confidence and a sense of purpose and hopefulness. One adolescent said to me once, I had never contributed to anything positive. The physical work, while not always enjoyed by some adolescents, really becomes a source of pride. Hard work is good. It works the body and the mind. Whatever you do with your hands enters your heart, Hoichi Kurisu once said. Now, this area of the garden, this dry creek bed near the south gate, turned out to be really one of my favorite areas that we worked on. So basically what we did was we removed some of the rocks, washed them off with water, scraped all the dirt off on the underlying surface down to the landscape fabric, and then replaced the clean rocks. It was a pretty laborious task, and it took us quite a few weeks to complete. And what was interesting is that the adolescents would go back to the facility and share what happened, and then the next week when my new group came, they already knew what was happening, and there was this effect of everyone really just working together as the team, an unexpected, lovely consequence of working together. Sometimes we have really interesting conversations as well. The garden creates this sense of space. to allow people to reveal things. One time we were all weeding the moss, and people are chatting about how soft the moss feels, how, fluffy and pillowy it is as we're picking these microscopic little weeds out of there. But one of the adolescents was quite anxious about the whole thing. But, he revealed his anxieties, and then everyone shared, and it was just really a magical moment. And the garden allows things like this to happen, even in the space of work. So this is Canyon Falls. It's actually a closed-off section of the garden. It's up where John's home used to be. And we do, after our work, we do a 5 to 10 minute bit of meditation up there. I do encourage the adolescents to breathe deeply, but really my only rule is to be quiet. So, which can be difficult sometimes. Occasionally you get people who just really want to touch the water, play in the water. Again, I don't mind as long as you're quiet. They're doing something. Karasensui gardens express water surfaces. As you can see here, this particular pattern is a concentric circle expanding out. And sometimes, depending on the patterns, it really gives us opportunities to maybe connect with life. So this particular example, maybe an action or your action is quite similar to throwing a rock into the water, and this action has unintended consequences or intended consequences that ripple out from that action. The best design creates a natural connection between the house and the garden. Americans don't design with connection as a priority. Our foundation plantings are created to influence others. Curb appeal is our main goal. But Japanese gardens are created with privacy in mind, and the plantings are placed away from the house, creating a beautiful view from each window and door that's looked out of. This connection is so important, and the good design allows this to happen daily and with ease. A beautiful view from inside this space. The program ends with an opportunity to feed the fish, which is always a fan favorite. Sometimes a turtle or a duck joins us as well. As we conclude, the adolescents are always thanked for their hard work. A complimentary pass is given. As we had noticed early on in the program, when the adolescents were dismissed from their inpatient program, they would bring their families to the garden. And then, of course, a copy of a Huichi sketch of their choosing to remind them the importance of connection. We're achieving connections through nature, the tour, observations, connections to other cultures by discussing tea ceremony and how the guest house architecture creates daily interactions with nature. Connections to hard work by doing physical, sometimes menial tasks. Connection to the quiet within ourselves by meditating. Connection to time by reflecting on the seasons and continued growth within the garden. The connections are important, and that they are of mind, body, and spirit working together to allow the adolescents to continue to mend, change, and grow. As they discover their connection to nature, they learn another coping mechanism and a source of calm and strength for times when life is difficult or forks in the road require a decision. So they may find a difficult road not necessarily less challenging, but the courage to move forward anyway. Nature is our best teacher. Thank you.
Hey everybody, my name's Tia Ho, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the interdependence that you started to hear about in Catherine's wonderful presentation about ecosystems health and human system interdependence. And that's going to be a precursor to talking just a little bit about nature therapy. And I'm not sure I'm doing this right. Am I doing it right? Okay. So I wanted to start briefly by just honoring that we're on Kumeyaay land, and I want to give gratitude to all the people who have come before us tending this land, and all of the more than human beings that are surrounding us right now in this garden space. And one of the reasons that I want to acknowledge stolen land and the history of genocide on this country, and really many countries across the planet, is because it's part of repair. And one of the things about our modern society is that we've been taught that we're separate from nature, which allows us to dominate lots of things, including other people. And so it's just part of repairing that connection, both for ourselves and for everyone else, and for the more than human beings. So you can learn more. If you don't know a lot about whose land you're on, you can go to nativeland.ca. It's just a starting point. There's a wonderful documentary that many of the bands and tribes and nations of the Kumeyaay put together about Kumeyaay history that's on YouTube under an Indigenous channel, and that's what this clip is from. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. So we're going to, by the end of this presentation, I'm hoping that you'll be able to describe some of the ways that thriving ecosystems support our health, identify examples of ways to repair or maintain ecosystem health that support community health, communicate what, oh right, I should take this off. I don't have to have this on up here. Thanks. Communicate what nature therapy is, connect how some of the elements of nature therapy connect to pathways to health. And for all of you who are engaged in garden spaces, some of this may be really familiar. And what I'd like to welcome you in is with an invitation. So I'm just going to invite us to take 2 of the longest and deepest inhalations and exhalations you've taken today. And while you're taking that first one, you can soften your gaze and look at the moss. You can look outside at the beautiful water that's moving, the light. But I'm just going to invite you to kind of just consider what it would be like to give thanks to the land that we're on. And this is an invitation, it's not required, but I'm going to go ahead and take 2 of the longest and slowest inhalations I've taken today and exhalations. So this kind of practice is really similar to what we might be doing when we're out in a garden space, even if somebody doesn't invite us to try it out. We slow down. We let our senses connect with what's around us. And through this, the ecosystem ends up being a type of healer. So it ends up helping us reconnect to the aliveness that we are, the nature that we are, rather than feeling so separate all of the time. So one of the things I want to remind us all about, those images are different types of images where nature is being incorporated in urban landscapes in where I am based in Portland, Oregon, mostly on Chinook land. And this is a definition of nature from one of the organizations I partner with called the Intertwine Alliance. And it's really encompassing, reminding us that we are part of nature. Nature really includes everything around us. And from the microscopic to the macro, it may be managed land or it may be not managed. And usually when we think about ecosystems or nature, and I'm not going to go into all of the details of this diagram, but we think about what it does for people. And that's part of that whole separation piece. We think about all of the ways that it provides different things like foods and materials. It regulates different things like seasons or water systems or soil systems. It provides cultural benefits for us in terms of aesthetics and things that we utilize as part of our heritage. And it supports our basic needs, including shelter and food and different, the things we need to basically survive. But what can be missed from this is our impact on all of these ecosystems and the ways that beyond our basic needs, nature actually ends up supporting our mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional health. So I'm not going to, this presentation is basically I'm going to look at each one of these different pieces that's in this little rainbow diagram in turn. So one of the first hypotheses, there are lots of different hypotheses about why humans may end up having positive benefits from being in thriving natural ecosystems. And one of those is the biophilia hypothesis. It's really this idea that we are part of nature. We've evolved in connection with it. Humanity has been on the planet for hundreds of thousands of years, and then our ancestors millions of years before that. So our brain actually has different ways of responding to the natural systems around us, even things like the way that fractals are part of a lot of different natural designs. And urban landscapes don't tend to have those designs in them. And this is also connected to this concept of attention restoration. So that diagram in the center is a theory. This is actually a medical doctor who drew this for me and didn't draw it for me, but he drew it and allows me to use it in my presentations. But the idea here is that when you're working on one narrow focus at a time, the way your brain is focusing attention means that it really creates this separation in order to do one object at a time. And that can be any type of work. It doesn't have to just be a computer. It can be, even doing work outside where you're just doing one simple thing at a time. And that can it requires so much attention that you can actually fatigue that capacity of the brain. And it can increase the amount of physiological stress you have. And then when you are in nature, immersed in nature, using all of your senses to connect with nature, on the bottom right-hand corner, you actually lose some of that connection, and your brain changes the way that it's focusing, or in this case, diffusing attention. And that actually changes the way that your brain waves move, and I'm not going to get into all of the neuroscience in here, but it essentially creates a feeling of relaxation. The other concept about this is that it's thought that when we are out in nature and doing different types of things, it actually distracts us from our analytical, judging, criticizing, planning capacity. That's a wonderful superpower that we need all the time in our society, but when it's turned inward and it's starting to analyze and chew on all of our problems, this actually increases the amount of stress that we experience. It's also called rumination. And that's part of what people start looking at in some of these research studies. So this is an example of a study that was looking at how some of the things that we might be seeing when people are outdoors is purely the stress recovery benefits of physical activity. So when you're physically active, you're getting oxygen, you're getting more potentially your breathing changes, your heart rate changes, you're actually reducing the amount of toxins in your body through a lot of different things from physical activity. And some of the new research on being physically active is that the most benefits for folks who sit a lot, who are really sedentary, is just 10 minutes a day getting your heart rate up can reduce the risk of more than 25 different chronic diseases. So I know we've got all those, 150 minutes, believe me, I know about all of that stuff, but really, as long as you do a little bit every single day, this is helping your system. But they basically had folks go for 90 minutes walking along a paved, busy street, and this was a case control where they're comparing two different groups of people before and after. And they had another group of people basically walk in a park, like one of these gardens, in a mostly unpaved, tree and grass covered natural environment. And then they gave them surveys about kind of what they were thinking about and their stress and depression. And then they also did some brain scans. And what they found is that when folks were walking in busy, noisy urban areas, they were thinking about all their problems. And they had an increased activity in the portion of the brain, one of the portions of the brain that's in part of thinking about all your problems. And then when folks were out in nature, they had a decrease in that. They reported a decrease in rumination, and then the brain scans also matched that. So the reason this kind of a study is important is you're starting to develop causality rather than only association. This is another study related to immune response. So this is part of a whole suite of studies that the relatively newer field from the 1980s of forest bathing. And this is really looking at what happens to our physiology when we are letting our senses really physically bathe in all of whatever the natural area is that we're in. So like the last study, this is two groups of people in very similar kinds of structures where one of them was 3 days and 2 night trip in the forest. The other one was 3 days, 2 night trip, in a busy, fabulous city, kind of doing touristy things. And they did before, they did 7 days after the trip, and then they did 30 days later. And they found that for the folks who were in the forest weekend, that their blood and urine samples, both at 7 days and 30 days after, had elevated levels of what are called NK cells, or cancer-fighting cells. They also had an increase in cancer-fighting proteins in their blood, and they had a decrease of adrenaline in their urine. And adrenaline is a type of stress hormone for, when you really need to get stuff done and, not get hit by cars. That's really helpful. And then in comparison to that, the group who just had the really fun sightseeing trip didn't have any changes. So their blood and urine samples were no change from before they went on the trip, and they also didn't have a change in adrenaline. So this way you're starting to see, they're thinking that they measured the phytoncides. I didn't put that on the slide, but when plants and trees, they actually communicate with one another about things that are happening. So if there's, for example, a beetle infestation happening at the edge of a forest, the trees will communicate through different chemical signals. Hey, everybody, get your signals up to protect against whatever the beetle is. And so those phytoncides, we actually absorb those, and our immune system responds and helps us to fight off invaders, too, of a certain kind. So another piece of research is really about social connection. So as you heard in Catherine's presentation, it's really common for people to connect with one another when we're outside, whether that's in different types of family or hiking trips or what have you. This is fly fishing. But the same thing can happen when you're in social groups as when you're out in nature, which is that you stop thinking about all your problems because you're connecting with one another. Another type of research that people are looking at is what happens when you take land that's been heavily polluted and you transition it out of heavily developed into more green space. And this is a series of different studies in Philadelphia, and they're finding that when they start, so the way this slides go, or on the left-hand side is before, the middle is when they're in the middle of changing these areas, and then on the right is afterwards. And they're finding that residents, this is a really sophisticated design, it's one of my favorite studies. They basically started looking at things, recording different types of things around what people are saying and reporting, both in terms of crime and self-reported depression and worthlessness feelings. And they're finding that when these areas improve, the self-report goes down and crime actually goes down, and it doesn't get displaced from other parts, which I didn't include in this slide because I don't have permission to use all those diagrams. But this is just a really fun way to start thinking about things about nature. So I just want to invite you, and I don't know how much time I have. Do I have 5 more minutes? 5? I do? Okay. So just want you to start thinking about how this matches or differs from your experience of being in green spaces. What is it that you typically do when you go outside? Are you hiking and running and you've got your ear pods in? Or are you slowing down and letting nature kind of support you? Hiking and running with your ear pods in is still going to be great. And I just invite you to take some breaks to let your senses really bathe in the rest of the environment. And this is connected to a field called ecotherapy. Arguably, this is much older in terms of healing because it aligns with, indigenous practices and wisdom practices about being supported by the land in the more than human world. But increasingly, especially in forest therapy, this idea of there's an international association of forest therapy that's really working to train licensed health practitioners to start writing prescriptions around getting people outside, to have different kinds of walks that are structured in such a way where you can do different kinds of practices along the route as a way of promoting health and wellness. And what I've read from the mindfulness research is that there's a lot of overlap. Because what's happening in mindfulness is that you're really training your attention capacity. You end up doing some of the same things that happen when you go outside, although you don't have to sit in a yoga studio in order to get the benefits of this, is kind of what I want to point out here. So mindfulness practices have been found in different research, and I know there's a huge range of different types of meditation and contemplative practices, but they tend to increase self-awareness, your attention capacity, and your ability to regulate emotion, which helps feelings of clarity, ease, awareness, focus, and for certain types of meditation, also a feeling of compassion for yourself and others. And I know I apologize, I tend to put a lot of complex information on slides. So this is Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett wrote a book called How Emotions Are Made, and it's a very modern paradigm about how our neural networks create emotions based on four ingredients. One of them is your past experiences that your brain has been recorded since you were in the womb, and your bodily sensations, as well as all of the sensory inputs around you, and where you put your attention. So when you're outside or when you're in mindfulness, you're training where you're putting your attention, and that actually cues what kind of things you're taking in through those senses from that environment, and you can actually, because of brain plasticity, end up shifting some of the ways that you end up processing past experiences. So this is that same slide from the very beginning. This is essentially a summary that, when we have more accessible, thriving nature exposure, we have the potential for more of these positive benefits. And one caveat I want to point out, which I'm not going to go into the details about, is that right now, because of how our modern societies have been developing for a long time, there isn't equitable access for who gets access to these kinds of benefits. And if we had another presentation, we could go into all of the different suggestions there are about making sure that more people, particularly Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color, people with disabilities, people with lower incomes or are experiencing poverty have equitable access to things like this wonderful garden that we're at. So there are some further explorations here on this slide, and I don't know if people get access to these slide decks. Usually at conferences you can see them, but I've put a couple of different articles here and a couple of books, so I'll pause that for a moment if you want to look into things further. And I just want to summarize by saying, you are part of nature, you're alive right here, right now, and along with everything around you. And nature therapy is about immersing and connecting back to that aliveness, and we can help ensure more people get the benefits if we address inequities. So thank you so much, and I'm going to hand it over.
I think my presentation is going to be same topic, basically wellness in Japanese garden, but from the design perspective. And how can I? So, which one is which? Okay. So the effect of nature can be divided into three parts. One is by eating and exercise and viewing. And the Alzheimer is basically the disease which you got. The brain is aged and falling apart. And currently there's no medication for that. And there are many non-pharmacological treatment sought, but most of the non-pharmacological treatment is not available for the late-stage dementia people because they lose the mobile mobility and they cannot understand the direction, what to do. The viewing nature is probably one of the few remaining possible treatment for them. As long as they can see something, we can offer the natural view. And there are many studies actually reported on the healing effect by viewing nature. But the question is really green space, all green space are same? We know it's not. There are many type of green spaces like French garden, Italian garden, Japanese garden, Chinese garden, park, and all give to you different impression and effect. So, and when you see the response of brain, when you feel beautiful, then your orbitofrontal cortex get activated, and then that result the release of dopamine, and that help you to be kind of alert. So based on this physiological explanation, it's very fundamental to provide something beautiful. Here, there, okay. And here is the prefrontal cortex. So meditation and wellness has been talked a lot. And meditation may help to manage stress and high blood pressure and many good things. But it's not so easy. Basically, meditation is the action you do not do anything, but it's not sleeping. And in Buddhism, the practitioner do not close eyes completely. You half open, because if you close eyes, you fall asleep. And like it's very tricky. You have to open your eye, relax, but relax opening eye, which means you cannot move your eyes, or you cannot move your body, you cannot move your head, but your pupil has to be slightly jiggling, moving to give you the sense of alertness. If you completely stop your pupil, then that is lead you to get boredom or sleepiness. So it's very, very tricky and very difficult to do. So Japanese monks, when they introduced Zen meditation, they found looking at garden is more helpful than looking at the wall, which Chinese Zen monks has been done and doing. So Japanese Zen monks started to make Zen garden to help themselves to do this practice. So the Zen garden is the space which is to be viewed only, not to go in, not to do any gardening, but just to see and to help the practitioner of Zen to meditate. So here is the oldest Zen garden in Japan. Maybe many of you have been there. It's a Tenryu temple. And this is the building. This is the main temple. From here, there's a huge veranda, and inside is a chanting room. And people sit on this veranda and view out. you can walk around, but this garden is mainly designed to be viewed from the center of this building. This is the main view from the center of the veranda. It's a wonderful panoramic scenery of water pond, the pond in front, and hill on the back, and mountain for the back. And here is called the Dragon Gate waterfall. It was real waterfall in the long time ago, but it's now dry. And this waterfall, the Dragon Gate fall, is the famous Chinese story that once upon a time, small carp tried to go up the 3 steps hill, the waterfall. And he fell many times, and he tried many times, and then finally he went through it, and he climbed that waterfall. And then the god watching his effort, and when he made it, the god turned this little carp into dragon. So that is the story. And this story is very favored by Zen monks, just representing the difficulty of the meditation and get the enlightenment. So just to represent that effort, you never give up kind of effort. This waterfall represent that waterfall and little carp inside. So this is abstraction. This is the 3 steps of waterfall. Here is the abstraction of little carp. It's very hard to see from the distance. So people gaze at that. This is the trick. You have to look very carefully, one point. And then, so this helps people to sit still, look at one place, and then when they find this stone fish, then they think about the story again. It's lead to another imagination, and they can probably spend another 5-10 minutes. So this is the kind of the function of Zen garden, to guide people, to lead people to the meditation without forcing them, like unconsciously. So this is another trick of this Tenryuji, which I like. If you recede and watch this garden, then if you are recede to the inside of the building, then the building shoji screen frame, and then you see the waterfall. So waterfall started to be zoomed in, and when you go out, you see the panoramic view, but when you go in, you see only the waterfall, and then when you look around, you see the dragon on the wall. So it's a kind of association between the dragon and the story in the interior space and outside landscape. And here is another famous example, which is Yoanji, which has 15 rocks scattered in this white palette. It's very small, so you can have entire garden without shifting your head. The smallness is very important because it's very short distance. You can see detail when you look carefully. So this is the diagram. Wherever you sit, you see more or less entire garden without moving your head. And to look at the stone, you have to look down. This is kind of meditation posture. The eye kind of half closed, looking down, still. And looking at that small space, it's interesting. It's very small, but the scale is very relative. in proportion. So you do not feel that these rocks are small. The more you gaze at that, you start feeling that, okay, I feel like I see these rocks like a mountain on above the crowd or island on the ocean. Why the Japanese Zen garden do not plant tulip in here, for example? If you plant tulip or rose in this garden, the miniaturization, the sense of miniaturization suddenly just destroyed. So to keep that abstraction and miniaturization, this garden do not have any specific thing. Like you should not go in, because if you go in, you are a big guy, and if you stand in this garden, suddenly this garden started to see very small. The wall behind, super short. Probably your head come out from the top of the wall, but you do not feel that the wall is small because everything is small. So this is a trick. So the more you see, the more you find the detail. There's a rake, each pebble that is very, very small. And you started to feel, oh, it's super clean. How the monk cleans so well. No weed, no trash. And sometimes, this is a famous koan, the story associated with this ryoanji. Like, think about the famous question in Zen. The mother tiger had 3 cubs. One is very bad guy. And if the mother is not watching, he eats his brothers. And this mother wants to cross the stream, river, and she wants to cross 3 cubs alive. How she can do that? Thinking such a question, looking at the garden, probably you can stare at these 15 rocks for forever. So this kind of thing is like a design trick of Zen garden, Japanese garden. Thinking about that, maybe each rock can you see as a tiger? So attention restoration theory needs to have soft fascination, first of all, and involuntary attention. Well, soft fascination can be done by kind of creating beautiful scenery, not shockingly outstanding, like a big fountain or something, but nice plants or something. But how can we do this involuntary attention? This is very difficult. Points to induce involuntary attention in Japanese garden. First, the short distance. Everything is set quite short distance compared with like an English garden, Chinese garden, French garden. English garden, you see, maybe in the storehead or stove garden, the temples and main feature is like 200 yards away. But Japanese garden, most of the thing you can see is like 2 to maybe 6 meters away. So even short-sighted elder people can detect something in front of there. So short distance is one thing. So some Zen garden is intentionally small. Even the site of the temple itself is large. They enclose the garden space very small because they need to see from the meditation point. And the second point is multiple fixation points, which within effective field of view. And asymmetric arrangement. Don't place things symmetrically, which kind of frees the eye movement. So to keep pupil keep moving, you have to arrange things asymmetric way, maybe triangular way. And proportional miniaturization, this is very important. if one of the elements break this proportion, then the miniaturization cannot be seen as miniature. It's just, it can be seen silly. And abstraction. Hopefully, if the rock induce some image or story, which lead the viewer to some other world, that would be great. So let me introduce my study. This is the study with a Japanese subject in Nagasaki. So this is a nursing home, and this is the tatami room, and this is the tiny garden we had. So this is the location. And here is the before. What do you think? I think this is green space, but it's not so beautiful. It's not beautiful because the top part is abandoned, kind of, but this is the next door's, the neighbor's property, so we cannot touch this. And this is the retaining wall, and here is the wall. It's not good. So I proposed first, this is the ground plan. It's zigzag, the white gravel, and this is the black gravel, and this is the lawn, white gravel and lawn, so different color and diagonal pattern. And here is the maple and plum tree, two plum tree, white and red. And here is the camellia tree, and this is the bamboo. So you see through things, one after another. If the tree lose the leaves, you can see through it. And a little bit flower by season. And the height is very low. This stone lantern is like a 2 feet this low, and here is the garden. So I screen the top part, screen the side, and this is the diagonal division of the ground, and it's very small, but you don't feel the smallness because anyway, you are sitting on the tatami mat, so your eye level is very low. So, how is this? So I measured the before, after, door closed with scent, with this garden. This is the before. It was Alzheimer patient, average 90 years old. Before construction, it was, this is for 15 minutes. It is significantly, their heart rate got lower with the garden view. Interesting thing is the door open is much better than door closed. And when you have the scent, in the beginning, you have more or less same effect with the door open, but when you forget the scent, it goes up to the door closed. So, and here is the point. Nobody slept for 15 minutes when the door opened. But when we closed the door, they started to sleep again. Okay, so the door open, door closed is very different. And also here, the emotion, expression. When the door is open, when the garden got constructed, many people smiled, very happy, sitting there for 15 minutes. We took many patients to this garden room, especially when the doctor and nurse think the person is going to get panic in the afternoon. Well, there are some sundown syndrome, Many elder people get very, frustrated, irritated after like 4 o'clock and cannot sleep, get very, agitated in the evening. And doctor, nurse who are taking care of them can see this happen. This may happen today, or just looking at their bowel movement or their eating habit. So when they thought, this he or she may get panicked today, they took these patients to the garden, and then they found there's no panicking. So at the end, basically after spending time in the garden, everybody got relaxed and happy. And for this experiment, we did not limit the time. So some people stayed like 30 minutes, some people just for 3 minutes. But anyway, the effect continued to the day after. So another person, this is a 98 years old lady who just came out from the long-term hospitalization. She didn't like to participate in regular rehabilitation. So the hospital took her to the garden twice a week, 30 minutes, just chat and have tea. And then she started to volunteer doing gardening. Yeah, and then, okay, this is the last. Anyway, well, the effect we found in the garden is really not only sit still, but also a recollection of old memory. And maybe because of the abstraction of Japanese garden, many people started to talk about their past. The stories are very different, but always good memory. For example, their backyard garden or their travel. And that kind of tapping old memory is one of the effects of wellness in Japanese garden. Okay, thank you very much.
In 2004, he sent 800 letters, 1,500 emails, and made several hundred phone calls to landscape architects, interior designers. 4 years later, a landscape architect called Takeo Usugi called and reminded him that he still remembered the phone call and the brochure he received in the mail. There was a small Japanese garden in Los Angeles at the Japanese American Culture and Community Center in Little Tokyo that needed 3 bridges. Takeo designed that garden back in the 80s, and now the expansion allowed them to put the 3 bridges in. He wanted him to build them. After several visits to the garden and planning the sites where all the bridges were, they were finished just in time for the visitors who participated at the International Conference of Japanese Gardens outside of Japan in 2009, 2 years before NAJGA was established. The main bridge was the last one to be finished, and by the time the conference participants showed up at 9 o'clock in the morning, it had been standing there for a mere 2 or 3 hours, fully assembled. Of course, nobody knew that. It was a rushed visit through the garden for the close to 100 participants, but led to a quick handshake and a business card exchange with a lead horticulturist from a Midwestern public garden. "Let me call you once I get home," he said. And with all of that, the group left, disappeared to visit other important landmarks in the region. 2008 was a very interesting year. Lots of plans for the future. Then the housing market collapsed. brought down the construction industry as well. Others saw an opportunity to be strong and to stand out from the crowd. Takeo oversaw the expansion of the Japanese Friendship Garden here in San Diego and called for a meeting in December. He did warn to bring hiking shoes. The site looked like nothing it looks today. Just another dry gulch like many other in San Diego. They hiked up to the top of the dirt hill lined with large, non-native eucalyptus trees, sometimes in ankle-deep sand. And then at the top, Takeo turned around and described his vision for all the plants, the dry streams beds, the structures on the hillside. There's going to be a viewing bridge here, a maple bridge there. Another moment of silence followed by recognizing his vision and forward-thinking design sense. His calm mannerism radiated confidence that was wrapped in the blanket of his spirituality that he represented as a longtime minister of a church. It would be almost another 6 years before the Maple Bridge was made its way down to the garden from Ojai, California in 2014. By then, the path, the cherry trees, and most stream beds were already shaped into the hillside. The bridge, as you walk across of it, was made out of recycled Alaskan yellow cedar train trusses from an Idaho coal mine. They were cut from massive 24 by 24 by 50 feet long timbers that were harvested back in the early 1900s. I'm sorry, I forgot to. This is the JACCC small bridges in Little Tokyo. This is another straight one. And that's the third the main bridge that crosses a little stream. This was the main plan that we saw in 2008. It has changed a little bit since then. And this is the Maple Bridge that went in first in 2014. As you can tell, there is no major pathways leading up to it. Everything was all finished later. Another 4 years passed. Not only the years, but unfortunately Takeo Usugi, a visionary architect for this garden, passed away in 2016. Almost exactly 10 years later to the date, the viewing bridge was being assembled. The posts were already standing and the beams were constructed with wood-to-wood joinery. These joints are only visible when there is no deck boards on them. Later on, the deck boards would cover them up and hide them from the untrained eye for many decades. Handmade Japanese chisels, planes, saws, several typical low sawhorses were scattered all around the site. Carefully wrapped posts, rails, beams that make up the bridge above the decking were stacked on top of each other. A middle-aged, unfamiliar Japanese person approached the site. He looked down from the temporary bridge, leaning against the rough 2x4 handrail, and commented, "So that's how they do it in Japan?" Not knowing who this person was, not knowing if it was a comment or a question, as a white Caucasian with a heavy Eastern European accent, he looked up and said, "That's how they told me they do it." He nodded and left without saying another word. The craftsman thanked him for his curiosity and continued to assemble the bridge. This was the second time in his life when he felt that he was accepted by someone who knew a bit about Japanese joinery and construction. Being able to use the tools efficiently takes time. Setting them up, sharpening them, doesn't happen overnight. To be able to hand plane a board to the high standards of a Japanese carpenter took him 5 years. Nobody tells you when you are good enough, since the blade can be always sharper, the shavings always be thinner, and the surfaces always be shinier and smoother. One day, planing several boards and being in the called zone, a highly respected Japanese carpenter from Japan walked along and placed his hands on the boards he was planing. He didn't say anything. But as he walked a little bit further away, he turned and looked back, raised his eyebrows, and nodded with his head. Then he knew he was doing something right. The person on the temporary bridge turned out to be Dennis Otsuji, president of the board of directors here at the San Diego Japanese Friendship Garden. Need not say more, he stopped looking for a carpenter to complete new and restoration projects in the garden. He is planning on building several other Japanese structures for this garden in the future, including a viewing pavilion, another low rail bridge, and a traditional tea room inside the building. The Midwestern gardener who actually called back later turned out to be Tim Bruner from the Anderson Japanese Garden. Once he got back to Rockford, Illinois, he called and said and invited to oversee and participate in a reconstruction and restoration of several of their Japanese structures, including the Giboshi Bridge. This is just a viewing bridge in different times, several years after the installation. This is a restoration project here, the Dragon Bridge all the way up at the top. This is, I think it was built around 2008 or 9 by an Atlanta craftsman using southern cypress timbers. And unfortunately, under the San Diego weather, they didn't weather too well. So we needed to reconstruct certain part of it. The handrails were removed and redone out of Alaskan yellow cedar material. The Giboshi finials were changed. On a previous picture, they were, oh, that's not it. They were wood. They were turned out of wood and then painted over. Then we ended up changing them over. And a little restoration on the post. And this turned out to be the finished product. Eventually, later on, we changed the decking boards too. So now it's safe and ready for the next 50 to 80 years. Once the Kannon Bosatsu, the Buddha statue from 1735, that's when they actually built that in Japan, was situated here in the garden, it felt if it was Takeo's spirit still watching us to beautify the garden to his likings. As our work at the garden continues and takes us on another phase of expansion, I'd like to bow my head once again and acknowledge the time and the people who helped to build it. I'd like you to encourage you to walk the garden with a conscious mindset and look at the rocks, look at the streams, the flowers, and acknowledge all that went into creating this paradise on a bare hillside. And as you walk across the bridges, see how you feel. I feel I have arrived. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Luke Benjamin, and I'd like to talk today about preserving and adapting traditional Japanese garden structures in North America. This is me. I'm a second-generation carpenter with almost 20 years of experience in traditional methods of wooden construction. For the past decade, my focus has been in traditional Japanese building techniques and the tools, skills, and knowledge used in creating the style of architecture we are all familiar with and appreciate so much. For the past 7 years, I've worked here at Joinery Structures in Oakland, California. Joinery Structures is a shop based out of a 9,000 square foot warehouse and has a long history of building Japanese style structures in North America. It was founded in 1989 by Paul Disco, whose 7-year apprenticeship in temple building in Kyoto led him to be an important figure in bringing the craft of traditional building from Japan to the United States. Joinery Structures continues to be a center for expertise in solid wood construction, design, architectural milling, fabrication, and when we get the chance, in restoring or building new structures based in the Japanese tradition. I'd like to discuss today the ways in which building in the Japanese method can be authentically maintained while also being adapted to the material availability, engineering, and building standards of North America. I would also like to explore the ways in which existing, historically significant structures in North America can be repaired, preserved, and enhanced with their authenticity and longevity in mind. It is also my hope to demonstrate and advocate that just as there is a flourishing community of horticultural and landscape experts working and teaching in gardens across America, there is also no shortage of qualified experts in the architectural and structural building tradition associated with Japanese gardens. I am a member of an organization known as Kazurokai USA that brings together a community of carpenters and professionals with a passion for traditional Japanese building techniques. And we have a keen interest in partnering with the North American Japanese Garden Association to form a stronger network that seeks to improve our ability to maintain and develop valuable and beautiful Japanese gardens. I'd like to proceed by showcasing the building process of a koshikake machiai, in hopes of demonstrating some of the ways in which we adapt to traditional building associated with gardens in Japan to North American conditions. This is a machiai that we finished recently for a private garden in California. The first and foremost thing to consider is the materials with which we build these types of structures. Sukiya or tea house style architecture in Japan is strongly rooted in a specific and unique material palette that, if disregarded, is fairly easy to spot as lacking a certain sense of character, or at least the commitment to a tradition. It can be a bit difficult for us here in North America to source the appropriate materials to honor this aesthetic, but I'd like to demonstrate that it is not as difficult as it may seem, as long as we are diligent and resourceful, and I'd like to provide specific examples of appropriate material choices that we can make. The structure begins with the material for the framework. In Japan, these natural members would likely be made of hinoki, or in Latin, Chamaecyparis obtusa, a softwood in the cypress family that is durable and highly rot resistant. Hinoki is not native to North America, but its cousin, Chamaecyparis lawsoniana, also known as Port Orford cedar, is. These Port Orford cedar rounds were harvested from a forest that experienced a destructive fire and a rapid and dense regrowth. The trees' fierce competition with one another led them to grow tall, thin, and slowly. There's about 70 years of growth in these rounds that are only about 3 inches in diameter. Trees like this in Japan are grown with intentionally similar conditions. These happen to be perfectly tended in the wild. The process that we use to fabricate a structure like this is very true to the traditional method. The majority of it is done in our shop, prefabricated, if you will, and then assembled quickly on site. Material is selected, chosen for a specific location in the building. The members are laid out or marked with their relationship to each other. Joinery is cut, and the natural members are traced to each other and then carved to match. This creates a seamless interaction of natural form. This highly calculated process is what enables the building to appear simultaneously organic and natural, yet refined and detail-oriented. We pre-assemble or dry fit the structure in our shop to ensure that each natural member fits in its determined place. Almost every piece of the building, including the shingles, is pre-made in the shop before being protected, packaged, and delivered to the job site for assembly. There are traditional and non-traditional ways of anchoring a structure like this to the earth, but here in North America we're pretty committed to concrete foundations. Commonly, machiai rests on what appears to be a simple arrangement of natural stones that make the foundation. What we do here is we anchor threaded rod into a concrete foundation. We float the stones on the threaded rod using washers and nuts on the bottom. We scribe our posts to the stones, and we thread the rod into a hole in the bottom of the posts that we can then tighten down from an axis pocket above. We tighten the entire thing down onto the foundation, which is infilled with structural mortar. This way of mechanically tensioning the entire structure to the rigid foundation provides an incredible amount of shear strength. Next, we install the members known as koshibari ita, and in Japan the most common wood to be used here is sugi, or Cryptomeria japonica, another highly rot-resistant softwood. Again, sugi is not readily available in North America, but we have a very similar lumber product in western red cedar, as you see here. These members are at the base of the building, where the most degradation will occur, and are assembled without mechanical attachment in such a way as to facilitate their replacement in the future. We then move on to assembling the rest of the structural framework, including the natural rafters, and beginning on the infill wall system. The traditional infill wall in Japan is done with lath strips of bamboo, let into the structural members and then tied together with rope. On top of this, natural clay is applied, and the wall structure becomes what is known as tsuchikabe. North American building standards are pretty committed to producing shear-resistant wall systems. So we frame our walls with wood and then sheathe them with rigid cement board, which can then receive a thin coat of natural plaster. We use cement board tape at the connection between wall and natural member to provide an anchor for the plaster to the framework, similar to the straw fiber used in the traditional tsuchikabe wall in Japan. Next, work begins on the roof and the various members that make up the traditional Japanese roof framing system. Here, the lath purlins, or komai, are Port Orford cedar, and the ceiling boards are western red cedar, where sugi would be typically used in Japan. A simple skip sheathing is placed below the traditional roofing system, known as kokerabuki. Here we use thin, non-tapered shingles made of western red cedar. In Japan, these would be hand-split shingles of hinoki, sugi, or sawara, another Japanese cypress, and attached with bamboo nails. We use stainless steel staples for attachment. As you can see, the shingle spacing is very small, producing a substantially thick roof medium with great weathering potential. While work is proceeding on the roof, a team of natural plasterers apply a base coat, followed by a thin coat of clay plaster known as warajuraku. This is a plaster product from Japan that is a mixture of clay, sand, and rice straw. While this is a Japanese product, it can be sourced in the US. However, there are many types of natural clay plaster that are commonly used in America that can appropriately resemble a traditional Japanese clay wall, and there are a growing number of skilled craftspeople qualified to apply it. The roof is capped with a wooden ridge cap, followed by fired clay tiles, or kawara, that are from Japan. These are not a product easily sourced in North America. However, there are an endless variety of suitable ridge caps that can be chosen, of more readily available materials such as wood, slate, copper, or bamboo. The finishing touch on the machiai is the wooden bench, here made from American elm, which is a suitable replacement for the use of keyaki, or Japanese elm. This elm wood comes from salvaged city street trees in Oakland. This structure was installed in an unfinished section of a private garden in California that accompanies a small guest house that we built as well. The garden was designed and created by JDA Suirakuen, a renowned gardening firm from Fukuoka, Japan. I'd next like to switch to the subject of the restoration and preservation of existing historically significant structures here in the U.S. We've had the pleasure of being able to participate in some great garden restoration projects on a series of properties in San Mateo, California that used to be one large estate. The gardens and structures were likely built shortly after the 1915 San Francisco World's Fair, when wealthy landowners employed Japanese gardeners and carpenters that were abroad for the exhibitions occurring in San Francisco. The gardens have been renovated and subdivided many times over the years, but some of the original structures still remain, including a garden pavilion and many hundreds of feet of fencing, much of it built with local materials using native Japanese methods. We had the honor of working alongside Bill Castellan, who's presenting here at the conference, and his incredible landscape crew, as well as the aforementioned JDA Suirakuen. We rebuilt the stately garden gate, and also a long stretch of fencing that spanned 2 properties. I'd like to briefly focus on the process of rebuilding a section of fencing that was degrading heavily, as well as being knocked over by the gracefully aging pine trees. Our goal was to minimally alter the aesthetic of the fence while replacing the degradation with high-quality comparable material and improving structural areas prone to degradation. The compromised section of the fence was removed, material being saved where it could be. We built temporary supports for the pines that had come to rely on the support of the fence, and we lowered the fence section to avoid further interactions with the trees. The trees would then be supported by separate wooden crutches. We rebuilt the section of the fence with an improved footing detail that raised the post bottoms up on mortar plinths to reduce their contact with soil and moisture. Several gates and fence sections had their roofs replaced, rotten post bottoms removed, and plinths built. Salvageable material was reattached, and new material was artificially aged in color to blend back in with the mature landscape. We finished by rebuilding some rotten doors with beautiful high-quality material. Here's the completed fence. The Joinery Structures team has had the incredible opportunity to work in some spectacular gardens across the U.S., but I'd like to take a minute to advocate for the many other qualified carpenters and builders throughout North America, who together make a strong network of professionals with a passion for integrity in building. Many of these groups and individuals are members and contributors within an organization known as Kazurokai USA. Our community is organized around a regular gathering in which we display and present on subjects based in traditional Japanese carpentry. We engage in group building projects, and the events culminate in a competition of skill in which individuals compete to produce the thinnest possible wood shavings using the Japanese hand plane, or kana. Certain members of the Kazurokai USA have been also planning and organizing an effort to source information on the outstanding number of existing structures of historical interest to the Japanese building tradition in North America, many of them focused in gardens that are associated with NAJGA. A survey is being developed that could be used to analyze the structures we have here in North America, with the clear goal of using this information to help appropriately preserve them for the future. Kazurokai USA has hopes of using the survey in conjunction with a formal certification process that can identify qualified individuals and ensure that the work being done here in North America is up to the exceptional standards we expect to see in high-quality gardens. We are hoping that a further collaboration between NAJGA and Kazurokai USA could lead to some very fruitful relationships that benefit both the craftspeople and the owners or organizers of Japanese gardens across North America. To conclude, I'd like to say that I hope that I have been able to generate an interest in the ways in which the building methods that inspire us from Japan can be used to produce quality work in gardens in America, as well as to help preserve the work that was done by the early proponents of bringing the Japanese gardening tradition to our soil. I hope today and in the future we can further explore the ways to mutually benefit from the knowledge and culture that exists in a flourishing community of people with a passion for Japanese gardens. Thank you for your time.
Hello everyone, My name is Katsuyuki Nakagawa of Nakagawa Juken Corporation. All of Japanese gardens you saw on this video are kind of artworks created by the wisdom and experience of the gardener in Kyoto. Those gardeners always face the garden and provide the careful work and intensive management with their pride and love to the garden.
そして誇りや愛の詰まった作品ばかりです。
However, Japanese traditional gardens are going to be disappeared even here in Kyoto due to the sweeping tide of modernization. Especially, I feel sad to see such trend that a small garden in the Japanese houses, which was a part of citizens' life and could bring a healing to the residents, is now going to be disappeared from Japanese housing and changed to the modern buildings. Is it only my feeling? On the other hand, you can see the natural rich cityscape by 30 minutes drive from the downtown of Kyoto to the suburb. I am living in the Kameoka city. Here in Kameoka, the trend of modernization is moderate, and the traditional scenery and Japanese houses still remain a lot. The Japanese beauty for each of the 4 seasons is condensed here by bird song, murmur of river, glitter of the broadleaf tree, brightness of the sunshine filtering through foliage. Whenever I see this original landscape, I strongly wish to keep the beautiful nature and landscape to the future generation and have such mind that we, Nakagawa Juken Corporation, have to provide what only we can do with as many people as possible. My job is the preservation and sales of the Japanese houses, which was built over 100 years ago by the traditional construction method. We call such Japanese houses as Kominka. The pillar and beam of the Kominka are made of the strong wood material to resist the disaster like earthquake and such natural phenomena as humidity and drying. Therefore, we can reform the Kominka by keeping the original pillar and beam, but taking out the wall and the floor. Furthermore, we can dismantle each of pillar and beam of the Kominka neatly and reconstruct it in a different place, which is called as Ichiku. Although the highly technical skill is necessary for the reform or Ichiku, we, Nakagawa Juken Corporation, has involved many cases of Kominka innovation business so far. We are realizing the coexistence of house owners' modern life and preservation of Kominka by renovating the house with a modern lifestyle and preserving the original atmosphere and the safety mind of Kominka. As a matter of fact, this attractive Kominka is also affected by the depopulation trend, and it results in many vacant houses. The vacant Kominka without any human maintenance will fall into decay furthermore. Our mission is to preserve the Kominka as much as possible and to leave it in history. We are proud of what Nakagawa Juken Corporation can take over the Kominka from the original owner, look for the new owner, make the reform as customers request, and support the best way of living in Kominka. This This is the example of Kominka renovation in Kyoto, Japan. We made a full custom renovation for the Kominka located in the countryside. This is the image of Kominka before the renovation. We will make the skeleton structure by taking out the wall, floor, and ceiling at first. The very few technical building craftsmen who has the Kominka renovation skill make our work of renovation. The ceiling of over 100-year-old Kominka has a large, thick beam hurry in the ceiling. They create a splendid appearance and atmosphere in Japanese architecture. In this case of Kominka renovation, we fully utilize this hurry as a design feature. Since we use the Japanese antique furnitures in various places, you can feel the typical Japanese culture there. We are renovating the Kominka by preserving the good feature and providing the comfortable way of life. We could renovate this vacant and almost collapsed Kominka and succeed it to the next generation. How was it? Could you feel the attractiveness of Kominka? We are now promoting the project related to the business model to export the dismantled Kominka to overseas market. Although we may have to overcome the various difficulty to realize this Ichiku business model to overseas market, we hope to establish this business model in USA under the collaboration with you. We are aiming at the realization of your high quality of life and the sense of sufficiency to feel as if you are living in Japan by keeping this original taste of Kominka and adjusting it to the local way of life.
高い暮らしの実現を目指しております。
Let's make the dream of living in the real Kominka come true. Since we plan to start the relocating Kominka business in USA, we wish to have the contact from any organization or individuals who has an interest in cooperation with us. Finally, I would like to emphasize that someone will have to succeed in such wonderful thing as beautiful Japan, beautiful Kyoto, beautiful Japanese garden, and traditional Japanese houses to our descendants from now on too. Any tangible properties surely include the people's wish and desire and the various history. It is difficult for us not to change the things continuously at that time when everything is going to be changed. However, we would like to expand the Kominka life adjusted to the future trend with carrying the respect and appreciation for the wisdom and technology of our predecessors. Those argument has been increasing year by year in Japan, but we feel some limitation to do it by Japanese only. Therefore, we highly expect to have your contact with us if you would have the interest in Kominka and our business. Thank you so much for your kind attention.